Bleeding in pregnancy is fairly common, and understandably, many people who experience this have a lot of concern about it. We're going to talk a little bit about this today and hopefully help you feel like you know what to do if this should happen to you. My name is Erica Casada. I am a midwife and prenatal provider at Professional Gynecology here in Brooklyn. Bleeding as a complication of pregnancy usually happens in the first trimester and the first 12 to 14 weeks of pregnancy. For some people, this bleeding actually shows up in small amounts when you would expect your period to arrive. It might be a little bit lighter than a normal period, might not last as long as a normal period. This is fairly common. It does not happen to everyone, and if it happened to you in your last pregnancy, it might not happen in this pregnancy. But this is called implantation bleeding, and basically just coincidentally, around the time that you would have expected to have a period, that fertilized egg is actually implanting into the wall of the uterus, and that does release a little bit of blood from that uterine lining, which you might see as vaginal bleeding that looks like a normal period. It is not dangerous. It's not a problem. It's also not dangerous if you don't see it. Either one is totally fine. If you're confused about, was that my period? Was that not my period? I know that I'm pregnant, but what was that? We can always help you figure out what that was by doing an ultrasound to see how far along the pregnancy is. Once you have established that you are pregnant, you know that you're pregnant, you're planning on continuing the pregnancy, and then if you do notice some vaginal bleeding, understandably this is going to be a big concern for you. I can tell you that having vaginal bleeding that turns out to be nothing, no problems, not dangerous at all, is actually very, very, very common. But unfortunately, there's no way for you to know at home. There's no way for me to know talking to you face to face on the phone, doing an examination in an exam room. There's no way for me to know either, is this an early sign of a miscarriage, or is this just a case of sometimes people have bleeding in pregnancy and that's totally fine? The only way to know for sure is to actually do an ultrasound exam and to see, is this blood coming from inside the uterus? Does it look like it's the early signs of a miscarriage? Or is it something that looks like it's totally normal? So I do recommend, if you are experiencing bleeding, especially early in the pregnancy, it's just a very good idea to go ahead and get care as soon as possible, whether that is in clinic, come in here, come to the office, go into urgent care or the emergency room, whatever is going to be easiest and most convenient for you so that you can get that information that you need. You may find, if you do go in and have an ultrasound, they may tell you words that sound very scary. Oh, it looks like there's a small hemorrhage behind the pregnancy. It looks like you have a subchorionic hemorrhage next to the pregnancy. And that sounds really scary because it has the word hemorrhage. This actually turns out to be completely normal, not dangerous, not a problem. When I said earlier about the implantation bleeding and the fertilized egg kind of implanting itself in the wall of the uterus, sometimes that blood that is released at that time kind of stays between the gestational sac, the bag of waters, and the wall of the uterus. And that's okay. It just kind of clots. It's almost like a scab inside the uterus, and it just takes time for your body to just dissolve that. It's not dangerous. It does not mean that you are more likely to have a miscarriage. It does not mean that anything bad is happening right now. It does not mean that anything bad is going to happen in the next few days. But it does have a scary sounding name. So if you have heard that you have an SCH or a subchorionic hemorrhage, I don't want you to worry about it. It's something that your providers are going to keep an eye on, that we're going to be watching with ultrasound, just to make sure that it diminishes over time. It does take a really, really, really long time, so don't be alarmed if it remains there for a little while. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you do go to the emergency room because you have had vaginal bleeding, in the emergency room you will have probably some blood work done, probably some urine tests done, and definitely an ultrasound. And if they determine that everything is okay, in that moment, that pregnancy looks fine, the fetus looks fine, everything looks normal, they're going to send you home. They're going to send you home with paperwork that says that you had a threatened miscarriage or a threatened abortion. And this sounds very scary because it has the word threatened and it has the word miscarriage in it, but this is actually great. This is the best possible diagnosis you can get because it means that you are not having a miscarriage in this moment. You came in because you had suspicion of one. You came in because you had that bleeding. It turned out to be an empty threat. So if you've gotten paperwork that says that you've had a threatened abortion or a threatened miscarriage, that also, I don't want you to worry about that. I don't want you to feel too anxious about that. It just means this is a person who had some bleeding. They came in, we checked them out, and they are okay, and we are sending them home. And if that's you, you should definitely follow up with your primary OB provider as soon as possible so that they know what's going on with you and can do some follow-up studies. If you have any questions about bleeding in your pregnancy, I hope that you will address that to your OB provider as soon as possible. And if you have any questions about bleeding in pregnancy in general, please let us know. You can comment below and we will get back with you. Thank you.